Little Miss Stubborn and the Unexpected Holiday by Roger Hargreaves. On this particular day, Little Miss Stubborn had invited Little Miss Brainy and Mr. Greedy round for a hot chocolate. But Little Miss Brainy and Little Miss Stubborn couldn't agree on anything. Not on how hot the hot chocolate should be, nor on how chocolatey the hot chocolate should be, or even on what cold hot chocolate should be called. All I know is that this hot chocolate is extremely good, said Mr. Greedy between mouthfuls. Perhaps we should change the subject. Does anybody know how big Little Island is? But of course, once again, Little Miss Brainy and Little Miss Stubborn couldn't agree. Little Miss Stubborn was sure that it was 1 metre long and 2 metres wide. Little Miss Brainy was sure that it was 2 metres long and 1 metre wide. If you won't believe me, then you'll have to go there yourself to check, said Little Miss Brainy crossly. So what do you think Little Miss Stubborn did next? She went there to check, of course. Little Miss Stubborn isn't called Stubborn for nothing. Are we at Little Island? Asked Little Miss Stubborn as the plane landed. No, Little Miss Stubborn, replied the pilot. The island you are looking for is over there. You'll have to go to it by boat. Little Miss Stubborn found a sailor and asked him if he would take her to the island. But he refused because a storm was on its way. That didn't stop Little Miss Stubborn, of course. There won't be a storm, she said. I'd like to buy your boat. But the sailor was right. There was a storm, a big storm. The waves grew larger and larger. They crashed against the sides of Little Miss Stubborn's small boat until finally one particularly large wave tipped the boat over completely, and Little Miss Stubborn was thrown into the sea. Little Miss Stubborn swam with all her might until eventually, exhausted, she collapsed onto the sand of Little Island. She fell into a deep sleep, but she woke up to a surprise. You'll never guess what it was. Little Miss Tiny, said Little Miss Stubborn. What a surprise! What are you doing here? I come to Little Island every year for a little holiday, replied Little Miss Tiny. Are you on holiday as well? But Little Miss Stubborn didn't have time to chat. How tall are you? She asked rather rudely. 5 centimetres exactly, replied Little Miss Tiny, surprised. Little Miss Stubborn had lost her tape measure in the storm, but that wasn't going to stop her. She had the perfect way to measure the island. 5 plus 5, that's 10. Plus 5 is 15, and so on until Little Miss Tiny was quite dizzy. Just as I thought. Little Island is exactly 1 metre long by 2 metres wide, said Little Miss Stubborn triumphantly. And without explaining her strange behaviour to Little Miss Tiny, she called out to a passing boat and hurried home, leaving Little Miss Tiny to enjoy her little holiday in peace. 1 metre long by 2 metres wide, said Little Miss Stubborn much later that night to a sleepy Little Miss Brainy, who had forgotten all about their disagreement. A few days later, Little Miss Brainy invited Little Miss Stubborn round for tea. Mr. Greedy was also invited. And he had already finished all the biscuits by the time the others had sat down at the table. There's a question written here on this biscuit tin, he said, licking the last crumbs from his fingers. How far is it from the earth to the moon? 384,400 kilometres, said Little Miss Brainy, without a second thought. How can you be so sure? Asked Little Miss Stubborn. It's written in all the books, replied Little Miss Brainy. But, she added mischievously, if you don't believe me, do check for yourself. Little Miss Stubborn took a deep breath. Very well then, I will, she said stubbornly, and off she went to call on her friend Little Miss Tiny.